Carl Jung once articulated that all that provokes irritation within us regarding others can serve as a pathway to deeper self-understanding. However, what he failed to convey is the method of employing that comprehension as a catalyst for profound change. Remain with me, for the insights I am about to share regarding the psychology of silence will profoundly alter your approach to handling disrespect. When faced with disrespect, your initial impulse may be to confront the individual, to compel them to comprehend their actions, perhaps even to impart a lesson. However, as illuminated by Carl Jung's seminal contributions to human psychology, the most impactful strategy lies not in your verbal responses, but in the deliberate withholding of communication. By the conclusion of this discourse, you will grasp why silence has emerged as a formidable tool in the realm of psychological engagement. Here's something most people never realize about disrespectful behavior, and Carl Jung discovered this through decades of studying the human psyche when you withdraw access to your time, energy, and praise. You're not just sending a message, you're activating what Jung called the shadow, that hidden part of their personality. They don't want to face people who disrespect you operate from a place of psychological comfort. They assume you'll still be there tolerating their behavior because your kindness keeps you around. Jung identified this as projection. They're projecting their own insecurities onto you, expecting you to carry the emotional burden of their dysfunction. But here's where it gets interesting and why you need to pay attention to every word I'm saying next. When you stop answering their calls, stop replying to their messages, stop showing up where you used to, you create what Jung called active imagination in their minds. Suddenly, they're left talking to an echo, trying to figure out what went wrong. The confusion isn't random. It's their psyche beginning to confront the shadow they've been avoiding. Carl Jung discovered something profound about human nature that will blow your mind. Aid. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But what happens when one substance suddenly disappears? There exists a distinct psychological unease associated with being excluded without rationale. Jung referred to this phenomenon as individuation, a process compelling an individual to engage with their true self. Your absence serves as a mirror, illuminating their actions devoid of the interference of your emotional responses. This aspect is vital. It is imperative not to hasten through it, for this reflective process proves to be significantly more impactful than any discourse you might have undertaken. The reason lies in its ability to prompt self-examination. Jung recognized that genuine transformation occurs solely through self-examination rather than through external coercion. In light of Carl Jung's exploration of psychological dynamics, withdrawing access does not imply passivity. Rather, it signifies a deliberate choice of what he termed conscious suffering over futile confrontation. You have come to understand that your time and energy are far too precious to be squandered on an individual who fails to recognize your intrinsic value. Jung articulated, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are when you prioritize self-protection over retribution." One is partaking in this profound journey of transformation. And here lies the psychological nuance that alters the entire perspective. The greater your attention to your own mental landscape. What Jung referred to as the inner work enhances your presence in the eyes of others. Initially, they may perceive your distance as temporary, expecting your return as it has happened before. However, as Carl Jung noted in his clinical observations, the human psyche cannot overlook a sustained absence. Days transform into weeks, and the weight of silence becomes palpable. They begin to perceive your renewed vitality, your focus redirected, your energy no longer centered around them. This is the moment when what Jung termed the transcendent function comes into play, the realization that they have lost access to you, not through overt displays, but through a profound psychological choice. Jung also remarked on a transformative insight. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But even more daunting for those who have disrespected you is witnessing your complete self-acceptance while they remain ensnared in their own psychological patterns. There exists a profound strength in undergoing transformation in silence, as one begins to elevate without the need to announce each incremental change. This subtle shift in energy aligns with Jung's theories of psychological evolution. While observers anticipate a reaction, hoping to witness a moment of vulnerability or aggression, you are diligently cultivating your growth in the background. Nothing I assert instills deeper regret in those who have disrespected you than the realization that they have misjudged your journey towards self-actualization, a concept articulated by Jung. They observe your ascent without acknowledgement, prompting their own introspective work, often unwittingly. Jung posited that the human psyche seeks predictability and established patterns. However, true psychological strength emerges from what he described as controlled chaos. The capacity to exhibit unpredictability in one's responses while preserving a sense of inner equilibrium. The error that numerous individuals commit is the presumption that one must declare their progress. They believe that success is only genuine when it is publicly shared, discussed, or substantiated. However, Jung recognized that authentic psychological advancement does not require external affirmation. It does not seek attention. It unfolds through what he termed active imagination and inner work. As one begins to elevate mentally, emotionally, financially, or spiritually without fanfare, one acquires what Jung recognized as a psychological advantage. Your unpredictability renders others unable to anticipate your actions, and this enigma takes on a psychologically daunting quality. Meanwhile, they remain ensnared in what Jung referred to as unconscious patterns, engaging in idle chatter, harboring skepticism, and attempting to elicit a reaction from you. These distractions are beneath you. You are transitioning, prioritizing personal growth, immersing yourself in literature, altering your approach, and valuing tranquility over trivial discourse. Here's where Carl Jung's psychology gets absolutely fascinating and why you need to understand this next part. Completely suddenly you're not replying like you used to, you're not explaining yourself. Not attending every argument you're invited to. That's what makes people take a second look, not your words, but your evolution. And according to Jung, this evolution triggers what he called the anima/ani. Mao's projection. They begin to see qualities in you they didn't recognize before. The beauty of it, you don't have to seek revenge. Your psychological development serves as the narrative it conveys to others. You did not shatter my spirit. Rather, you illuminated my true essence. Each quiet stride you take toward your aspirations, every achievement you realize unbeknownst to them, and every internal struggle you conquer becomes an integral part of what Jung referred to as the hero's journey, one they never anticipated. They presumed you would remain stagnant, reliant on their approval, and that their disregard would shape your identity. Yet, your silence has demonstrated what Carl Jung consistently asserted. The psyche possesses a remarkable ability for self-healing and transformation when nurtured in the appropriate environment. Jung once remarked, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." Maintaining composure in the presence of disrespect constitutes one of the most formidable psychological decisions one can undertake. It is not a sign of weakness, but rather what Jung referred to as conscious control. When faced with disrespect, individuals frequently anticipate an emotional response, as evidenced by Jung's exploration of psychological triggers. They seek to provoke your anger, to elicit a raised voice and a spirited rebuttal. Their aim is to witness your loss of composure, as it grants them a sense of psychological dominance. However, when you maintain your composure, opting for silence instead of shouting, and choosing peace over chaos, you fundamentally alter the power dynamic that Jung articulated. By withholding the gratification of witnessing your disintegration, you engage in a strategy that is profoundly insightful from a psychological perspective. Composure is not merely the act of suppressing one's emotions. Rather, as Jung posits, it involves the mastery of these feelings through a process he termed conscious integration. One of Carl Jung's most significant findings pertained to the concept of psychological boundaries. He stated, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people." However, what he uncovered subsequently will transform your approach to establishing boundaries indefinitely. The most potent manifestation of self-respect involves establishing boundaries without the obligation to elucidate them. When faced with disrespect, the initial reaction may be to rationalize the pain caused by such behavior. However, genuine psychological fortitude is found in what Jung referred to as sovereign enforcement. Safeguarding your boundaries discreetly, without pleading for comprehension, does not necessitate the act of slamming doors or elevating one's voice. It merely requires what Jung recognized as a subtle transformation in awareness. One ceases to respond to messages that deplete one's energy. One refrains from acquiescing when the true sentiment is dissent. One withdraws from those who reach out solely in times of need. Initially, they may remain oblivious to this shift, yet gradually, the access they once enjoyed begins to fade. This is not an act of malice, but rather a manifestation of what Jung termed psychological self-preservation. There exists a profound insight from Carl Jung regarding human nature that often eludes many. He articulated, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." However, he also found that there exists a particular psychological tranquility in opting not to pursue vengeance, not due to a lack of strength, but rather an appreciation for a more profound understanding. Existence possesses a unique ability to resolve psychological conflicts in a manner far superior to any efforts you might undertake. Jung called this synchronicity the meaningful coincidences that occur when you align with your authentic self rather than reacting from your wounded ego. Revenge often keeps you psychologically tied to the very person who wronged you. It drains your energy, clouds your vision, and keeps your emotions stuck in what Jung termed the past-oriented shadow. But when you let go of the need to retaliate, and ends, invest that energy into becoming a better version of yourself, you break the psychological cycle. Sometimes the most powerful psychological move you can make is to simply disappear, not out of weakness, not out of defeat, but out of what Carl Jung called conscious choice and self-respect. When someone disrespects you repeatedly, they expect you to stay, they expect you to keep showing up, to keep giving them access, to continue tolerating their behavior. But when you choose to walk away quietly, to remove yourself without warning, your absence becomes what Jung identified as a louder psychological MES sage than your presence ever was. And in that silence, they begin to feel the loss they didn't think was possible. Departing with a sense of dignity transcends the notions of ghosting or pettiness. Drawing from Jung's insights into psychological well-being, it embodies the act of reclaiming one's energy. It signifies a realization that the effort to validate oneself to those who fail to appreciate it is futile. One ceases to engage in trivial dialogues, relinquishes the expectation of apologies, and abandons the endeavor to mend what was never their responsibility. Instead, one exits with what Jung termed individuated grace, void of drama, final words, or explanations. This form of departure possesses a psychologically haunting quality, compelling individuals to confront their own behaviors without the distraction of your emotional responses. Carl Jung elucidated that this form of compelled self-examination serves as a significant catalyst for psychological transformation. Individuals may come to understand that your presence was never a right, but rather a privilege that they forfeited due to their own unconscious actions. As time progresses, they may attempt to reconnect and ponder the reasons behind your withdrawal. However, by that juncture, you have ascended into a state of psychological sovereignty, embodying a self-sufficiency that no longer seeks closure from those who inflicted the harm. 24, concluding your absence was not an act of retribution, but rather a means of safeguarding your essence. As Carl Jung astutely observed, the most profound connection one can cultivate is the one with oneself. By distancing yourself from sources of depletion, you create an opportunity for that which elevates your spirit. Those who previously failed to recognize your worth will observe from afar as you flourish independently. This realization resonates more deeply than any dispute, retort, or theatrical confrontation. For long after your departure, they will sense the void left in your absence, the grace with which you exited, and in that void, a sense of regret will inevitably take root, precisely as Jung anticipated. Thus, when next confronted with the folly of underestimating your value, disrespecting your fidelity, or misinterpreting your generosity, remember the strength of your own presence.